Hello all, it's Ellie and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. An extra little welcome back if you are joining me for my 31 days of Halloween. This is where I post a new video every single day of October until we get to the best day of the year, which is obviously Halloween. So feel free to subscribe to join in this countdown. It's going to be a lot of fun and rather spooky. For today's video though, I will be covering a crime case, and even though it is involved in my countdown to Halloween, in no way am I trying to offend anyone involved in this case or affected by this case. As you know, if you're on my channel, I really do enjoy crime and horror and I put them out here on YouTube. For today's video, we will be talking about the vicious and brutal crimes of Peter Tobin, a notorious Scottish serial killer whose crimes will be remembered by the UK for many years to come. Just a warning when it comes to this case though, because I will be talking about topics of murder, sexual assault, animal abuse and assault in general, so a trigger warning before we get into this. If for some reason you are affected by any of those topics, feel free to look in the description box. I will be adding helplines and resources there. Before we get into the details of the 3 known murders committed by Peter, let me start talking about Peter's early and personal life. Peter Tobin may actually be known as a different name to you, such as Peter Wilson, James Kelly, Paul Semple, John Tobin, Bible John, or even a different name, seeing as this man had as many as 40 different identities. He was born in Johnstone, Renfrewshire, Scotland. He was the youngest of 8 siblings and he was also a rather difficult child. In 1953, at age 7, he was sent to an approved school ordered by the court to keep him monitored and on the right side of the law. In 1970, he was convicted and imprisoned in England for burglary and forgery. He then moved to Brighton. It was here where he married his 17-year-old girlfriend, Margaret Mountney. Just a heads up, if for some reason I'm completely useless with names, so if for some reason I say the name of a place or the name of a person wrong, no offence, my apologies, it's my fault, I'm just completely rubbish at names. So yes. They met at a dance hall where she was the clerk and typist. They were married in August of 1969. Margaret said that Peter, who was now 23, would lock her in her room all day. She wasn't allowed to go out without him. She lived in complete torture while she was with him. He raped his wife 3 or 4 times and then also stabbed her, leaving her for dead. She was eventually rescued by a neighbour after they saw blood coming through the ceiling. Although this is a completely heartbreaking thing she went through, Peter would actually leave her unable to have children after he inserted a knife inside of her, cutting her internally. When recalling the terrible marriage, Margaret said, "He got me a black Labrador puppy, but I hadn't had it long when he cut off its head while I was at the shops and threw it out the window. I found boys in the yard using the head as a football." That is just a little insight of how twisted Peter really was. When Peter was jailed for a series of thefts in the early 70s, this was Margaret's chance to leave him for good, and luckily she done just that. In 1973, Peter, now 27, he married a woman named Sylvia Jeffries. But after just 3 years, she divorced Peter, and this was just after the death of their second child, who passed away at 2 days old due to breathing difficulties. Sylvia literally grabbed a carrier bag of some stuff for their eldest son and a pushchair and just got the hell out of there. She managed to find a safe house in London. During this short marriage, he would violently abuse her and their dog. In August 1993, Peter, aged 47, he attacked 2 14-year-old girls at his flat. The girls were trying to visit one of his neighbours, but when they realised that the neighbour was not home, they went to Peter's and asked if they could wait there so they didn't have to travel back home to come back out. This was when things actually took a very sad and dangerous turn. Peter forced the girls to drink strong cider and vodka at knife point. He then sexually assaulted and raped the girls, stabbing one of them while his youngest son was there. He then turned on the gas taps and left the poor girls for dead. They luckily both survived this attack. To avoid this arrest, Peter went into hiding and joined the Jesus Fellowship, a religious group in Coventry. He was obviously under a false name. He stayed with this club and managed to escape his arrest until he got caught in May of 1994. He was sentenced to 14 years but only served 10. It was during this time that Peter's third wife, Kathy, who was only 16 when they got together, managed to leave him for good. They had a child together, but it wasn't easy being pregnant while with this abusive man. Kathy said that he was all sweetness until he had me where he wanted me. Once I was pregnant, he changed and used Daniel to control me. He would always threaten to kill or hurt Daniel if I left. He would even pick him up and mimic throwing him on the floor. I felt like a prisoner. Now, in 2005, before his first known murder, 24-year-old Cheryl McClarkin said that Peter attacked her in her flat. Her boyfriend would often watch football with him, and she accepted an invite to go over and watch some TV with Peter alone. When she tried to leave, Peter attacked her with a knife. A quote from her was, "I looked down at the side of the seat and there was a belt and a tie. I thought he was going to tie me up." You can honestly only imagine the fear that she was feeling, not knowing what was going to happen to her. But she fought for her life and managed to escape with a cut hand and honestly a lifetime full of mental damage. This is where Peter changed his name once again and disappeared to St. Patrick's Church. Now you have a backstory on this absolutely horrific man. We will now go into the details of the 3 known murders that were at the hands of Peter Tobin. His first known murder victim was Angelica Cluck. She was a 23-year-old student from Poland that worked as a cleaner to help cover her uni finances. This was at the St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Church in Glasgow. This was actually the same church that Peter was a handyman at, but at this church, Peter didn't go as the name Peter. He went as the name as Pat McClarkin. This was to avoid being detected as the violent sex offender he was now registered as. Angelica was last seen alive in the company of Peter on September the 24th, 2006. Peter had only been at the church for 6 weeks and Angelica was helping him paint the shed. It's thought that she was attacked by him in the garage attached to the church. This poor girl was beaten, raped, gagged and stabbed 16 times and then also bludgeoned in the head repeatedly. He then hid her body in an underground chamber beneath the floor near the confessional in the church. Forensic evidence actually suggests that Angelica was still alive when she was placed underneath the floorboards. Police found her body 5 days after, on September the 29th. On September the 28th, a day before her body was found, police released a photo of the man known as Pat McClarkin because he was known as the last person to be with her when she was alive. Peter was arrested in London shortly afterwards because he had been admitted to a hospital under a false name, and people at the hospital related his face to the face of the photos that the police had released. Once DNA was taken from Angelica's body, we would learn that Pat was actually Peter Tobin. Peter already had an outstanding arrest warrant and this would be issued for him the year before. After he moved from Paisley without notifying the police, he managed to be tracked and arrested in London on October the 1st. He was taken back to Scotland for questioning in the murder of Angelica. A 6-week trial resulted from the evidence gathered. Took place between the 23rd of March and the 4th of May 2007. In the courtroom, Peter claimed his innocence for being accused of raping and murdering Angelica. He said that the sex was consensual and that he did not kill her. Even though DNA evidence was found in her underwear, his DNA was also on the kitchen cloth that had been stuffed into her mouth. His fingerprints were on the items found with her body, and her pair of jeans that were covered in blood had been abandoned in a wheelie bin at the church complex. Peter was found guilty of the rape and murder of Angelica and was sentenced to life imprisonment and to serve a minimum of 21 years. Peter now behind bars, and finally some good coming out of this horrible man, in the sense of he's behind bars, he can't hurt anyone else. The police now having Peter on their radar, they thought, let's look into him a little more. In June 2007, Peter's old home in Bathgate was searched in connection with the disappearance of 15-year-old Vicky Hamilton. This was one of Scotland's biggest missing person cases. Vicky was last seen on the 10th of February 1991 as she was waiting for a bus home to Reading. Peter is believed to have left Bathgate for Margate a few weeks after her disappearance. If we just quickly flash back to 1991, after spending the night away, Vicky Hamilton was last seen waiting at a bus stop, but sadly she would not make this journey home, and officers actually took 3,067 statements and spoke to 6,536 people at the time, and Peter was not questioned or brought up in any of these statements. For 11 days there was absolutely no news of Vicky until an apparent breakthrough. A chef that was on his way to work in the centre of Edinburgh found her purse lying in a gutter. The purse was dry and its contents were intact. It's believed that Peter tried to throw the police off by dumping her purse between the city's main railway and bus stations to trick the police into thinking Vicky was actually a runaway and she had actually taken one of these routes to escape. It was actually a trick that would end up tormenting her family for years, leaving them with no answered questions on her whereabouts and no leads on locating her. When Peter's name was eventually linked to this reopened inquiry in 2006, police recovered that he was living in this same area at the same time. Detective Chief Inspector Anderson said that the latest forensic science came into play. The main thing that we had which belongs to Vicky was a purse. The purse was subject to DNA examination and we were able to identify the DNA as belonging to the son of Peter Tobin. From there we went to 11 Robertson Avenue where we carried out a deep forensic search. When they searched his former home they would find evidence including a dagger with Vicky's DNA still on it. Peter was detained by the police and questioned for 4 hours by Detective Sergeant Alan Gore and Detective Constable David Crookston. Some of the conversation exchanged in the interrogation was that Detective Gore asked him, how did the skin get on the knife and how did the knife get up into the loft? Peter would reply, I haven't got a clue, but it was my knife in the loft, end of story. Peter was asked, do you have any explanation for that at this moment? He replied saying no, none. It would turn out that Peter actually ended up doing a house swap 500 miles away and he took Vicky's dismembered body with him all the way. He was ready to bury her in his new garden. She was still wearing her mother's rings. He literally moved into his new house and one of his neighbours recalls seeing him digging a hole in the garden. They now believe that he was actually digging Vicky's grave. The neighbour told the police, I looked over the fence one day and saw him digging the massive hole in the garden. What are you doing, Pete? Are you going to Australia? He said, no, I'm digging a sandpit for the lad. When he comes up, there is somewhere for him to play. And then 2 days later, it was filled and had been flattened down. In November 2007, the forensic team went to this house and started to dig up in the garden. They did find the remains of a human body, but they didn't just find one set, they actually found another. One set was matched to Vicky Hamilton and the other set had matched 18-year-old Dinah Ducknicole. I can't say it. Apologies again, really sorry. This led us to our third confirmed murder victim at the hands of Peter Tobin. Dinah was 18 when she disappeared while hitchhiking home from a musical festival with a friend in Hampshire on the 6th of August 1991. Her friend was dropped off, leaving Dinah alone with the driver. The friend said that there were children's toys in the back of the car, and this gave him the sense of the driver was non-threatening because he seemed like a father figure. Peter's ex-wife Kathy feels that he actually left some of their son's toys in the back of the car on purpose so he would seem like this soft, approachable man. Every night for 10 days following her disappearance, Dinah's cash card had been used in a chain of 5 different towns in the southeast when her body had been discovered in 2 bin bags. They had 3 thumbprints and a fingerprint on them just a few feet away from the body of Vicky Hamilton. She had been drugged and hacked in half at the waist. A thin layer of concrete had been poured over them as a grave. Her father, Ian McNichol, also visited the house that his daughter laid in the back garden of. Their family would now be able to lay her to rest and grieve. Exactly how he murdered Vicky Hamilton is still not completely known. People can only really bounce off theories based off evidence shown. A post-mortem examination revealed the presence of an antidepressant with a sedative side effect, which Peter had been prescribed before the murder. It was also the same drug he used to attack the 2 teenage girls in Hampshire in 1993. It was also later found in Dinah's system as well. The evidence led police to conclude that Peter had drugged, sexually assaulted Vicky and then killed her, possibly by strangulation, before using a knife to cut up her body in two. Peter was convicted of Vicky's murder on the 2nd of December 2008, with 122 witnesses giving evidence in all three of the murder cases. It's honestly just so sad, and you can only imagine the suffering each poor girl went through while they were in the presence of this absolutely violent, horrible man. It's also really heartbreaking that he managed to get away with like 3 known murders before he was on the radar. But even though these are actually 3 confirmed known victims of Peter, it is not the only crimes that he was linked to. But basically, from where these are just conspiracies from the police, there are actually no real hard police evidence connecting him to these crimes. Many believe that he could have actually killed up to 50 women from the 60s to 2006. Peter would actually taunt psychiatrists, saying that he had killed 48 women, and would ask these psychiatrists to prove that he had done them. When he was asked about other victims, he said, "I couldn't give an F," and this honestly just shows how evil and venomous this monster is. Peter is currently 73 years old and is serving 3 life sentences in the prison in Edinburgh. It's noted that he rarely leaves his jail cell after a suspected stroke and cancer diagnosis. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up this case. I hope you enjoyed it. Just again, no disrespect to anyone that is affected or involved in this case. Yeah, so if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, share and subscribe. Turn on my post notification bell so you are alerted when I next upload, but that will be tomorrow and then the day after that, seeing as I'm doing the 31 days of Halloween. Yeah, if you have any other cases you would like me to look into, just feel free to comment them below, and I will see you in tomorrow's case. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.